$1 billion eye in the sky has just blinked. Moments after capturing a close-range look at an interstellar intruder, the 3-Eye Atlas, NASA's Maven probe, has gone silent.
$1 billion spacecraft can feel invincible until the moment it goes quiet. NASA's Maven has circled Mars for a decade, watching storms, radiation, and the thin edge of space. But after it aimed its instruments at 3-Eye Atlas, only the third confirmed interstellar object ever seen, something changed. The visitor was moving at blistering speed, and Maven caught a look. It sent its last transmission on schedule, with every system reported green. Then December 4th arrived. Maven slipped behind Mars for a routine blackout that should have lasted 37 minutes. When it came back into view, Earth heard nothing across tens of millions of kilometers. No distress tone, no partial packet, no hint of where the voice went. That silence is now the real image, and it raises one unsettling thought. Was this just a failure, or did the visitor bring something we were not ready to measure? Maven is the steady watcher above Mars, and for more than 10 years it has done its job with quiet discipline. It has flown through planet-wide dust storms, endured solar radiation, and kept working while Earth drifted tens of millions of kilometers away. Every day it listens, measures, and sends back clean, predictable signals, so engineers get used to hearing its voice like a clock that never slips. That long record matters because it tells us this spacecraft is not fragile and it does not fail easily. In early December, a rare assignment arrives. Maven turns its attention from Mars to 3-Eye Atlas, only the third confirmed interstellar object ever seen passing through our neighborhood. This visitor was not born under our sun, and it is cutting through space at extreme speed, making every observation feel like a once-in-a-lifetime chance. From Martian orbit, the probe watches from a different angle, with less glare, so each frame can carry clues nobody else can catch. The plan is simple: point, capture, transmit, then keep moving. So if everything was normal, why did the next step end in silence, and what part of this encounter changed the story forever? Maven's new assignment begins with a simple turn, but in space, a simple turn can feel like a decision. From high above Mars, the orbiter shifts its attention away from familiar dust and thin air, then points its instruments toward 3-Eye Atlas, a visitor that was never meant to be part of this neighborhood. This is not a normal comet on a normal path. The report calls it only the third confirmed interstellar object ever observed, which means it comes from beyond our star system and it did not form under the sun that warms Earth. That single detail changes the mood inside mission rooms, because it turns routine tracking into a once-in-a-lifetime chance to watch something built by another system's history. From Mars orbit, Maven captures images as 3-Eye Atlas slices through the solar system at over 149,000 miles per hour. At that speed, every minute matters, and every picture feels like a frame pulled from a fast-moving chase. Engineers want clean data, scientists want patterns, and everyone knows they might not get a second shot. Mars is not just a backdrop. From that orbit, the planet blocks some of the sun's glare, and it offers a side view that ground-based telescopes cannot copy. A small change in angle can reveal a tail, a haze, or a shift in brightness, and those hints can decide which theory survives in the end. What makes the target even stranger is what astronomers have already been saying about it. The script describes a chemical intensity that has baffled researchers, as if the object carries signatures that do not match what they expect from familiar space debris. It is the kind of detail that sounds small, yet it can be the first crack in a rule you thought was solid. So Maven does what it was built to do. It watches, measures, and records while Earth waits far away. The last transmission arrives on schedule, and the spacecraft reports that its instruments are functioning normally. Systems are green. Nothing hints at trouble. For a moment, the story looks clean, almost boring, which is exactly how NASA likes it. But 3i Atlas is still moving closer, and the closer it gets, the more attention it pulls. The report says spacecraft and telescopes from Hawaii to India are tracking its approach because the object is heading toward its closest approach to Earth on December 19th. That date hangs in the background like a countdown, even while Maven keeps circling Mars and gathering whatever it can. In stories like this, the first clue is rarely a loud explosion. It is usually a quiet shift, a small mismatch between what should happen and what actually happens. Maven's images exist, the data stream is steady, and the mission appears stable, yet the timing feels loaded. Days before the silence, the orbiter had turned toward the interstellar intruder and looked straight at it. That is where the pattern begins to bend. If the spacecraft was healthy and the blackout behind Mars was routine, then the next moment should have been simple. Maven should slip behind the planet, lose contact briefly, then come back with the same calm voice as always. Instead, the story prepares us for a gap, and it is not the kind you can shrug off. So the question becomes sharper, and it points directly to what happens next. When Maven disappears behind Mars on December 4th, is it just another scheduled blind spot, or is it the doorway where this encounter turns from observation into mystery? A routine blackout was supposed to be the quietest part of the day because Maven had done this exact move before and nobody treats it like drama. On December 4th, the orbiter slipped behind Mars and the planet itself became a wall between the spacecraft and Earth. In mission control, that moment is normal, since Mars blocks the radio path and the signal drops the way a flashlight beam disappears when a door closes. The expected gap was 37 minutes, long enough for coffee, short enough to ignore. Before the blackout, the last transmission arrived right on schedule. The report says the instruments were functioning normally and the systems were green, so there was no warning line in the data, no strange tone in the carrier, and no hint that the spacecraft was struggling. Engineers stayed calm for a reason, because this kind of silence happens all the time and it usually ends on its own. 37 minutes is not long in deep space, but it is long enough to count. Every minute has a rhythm, and that rhythm is built into the way teams track probes that sit tens of millions of kilometers away. When the time window closes, the next step is simple. The spacecraft should clear the edge of Mars, the radio path should open, and a familiar handshake should return. But when Maven emerged from Mars's shadow, nothing came back. No signal, no data, no partial packet that says, "I am here but weak." The receivers did not catch a broken whisper, and the screens did not show a slow drift into noise. It was a clean absence, as if the line had been cut and the other end had stepped away. That is when a planned blackout starts to feel like a trap door. A short gap becomes a growing empty space, and the quiet stops being ordinary. Across tens of millions of kilometers, the silence stretches on, and the distance makes it worse because there is no quick fix, no reset button anyone can press from Earth. At first, teams follow procedure, because procedure is what keeps panic out. They check antennas, they confirm the timing, and they make sure the spacecraft is truly back in view. They listen again, then again, while the minutes turn heavy. The planet is no longer in the way, yet the spacecraft is not speaking. In stories about space, people imagine fireballs and shattered metal, but the most frightening failure is a missing voice. A probe can be alive and trapped in a bad state, or it can be damaged and unable to transmit, and both possibilities look the same from far away. That uncertainty is what turns this moment into a mystery worth chasing. So the central question sharpens, because the blackout itself was expected, and the silence after it was not. If December 4th was supposed to be routine, what happened during those 37 minutes that left Maven unable to answer when the line reopened? The report frames the loss of contact as a sudden break that follows an extraordinary observation, and that context changes how people hear the quiet. A normal gap is easy to accept, yet an unplanned one invites suspicion, especially when the last task was to watch an interstellar object. Even if the cause is simple, the timing forces engineers to think about what could have shifted during the blackout. In the next chapter, they start testing explanations, and each test leads to a bigger doubt that refuses to settle into routine. Spacecraft do fail, but this one feels different because the timeline lines up too cleanly to ignore. Maven had been orbiting Mars for more than a decade, and it built trust the way a steady voice does, by showing up every day with predictable signals and calm status reports. Days before the blackout, the orbiter did something extraordinary. It turned its instruments toward 3I Atlas and captured images of the interstellar visitor cutting through our solar system at over 149,000 miles per hour. That speed alone makes the encounter feel like a fast-passing shadow, yet Maven still managed to look straight at it from Mars orbit, which should have been a triumph. Then the log stayed boring, and boring is usually a good sign. The last transmission arrived on schedule. The report describes the instruments as functioning normally, with systems marked green. No creeping error, no gradual fade, and no warning that the next contact would vanish. If you were watching that data, you would have expected the usual short silence while Mars blocked the line, and then a clean return. When the return never came, NASA engineers began working around the clock, and the first instinct was not to blame a stranger from deep space. It was to search for ordinary causes that can hit any machine. A software glitch can lock up a system. Radiation can flip a bit. A sensor can misread, then cascade into a shutdown. These are not dramatic ideas, but they are real, and they have ended missions before. Engineers also know that deep space silence can be caused by geometry, and geometry is unforgiving. When a spacecraft slips behind a planet, the link is blocked, but it should reopen the instant the line of sight clears. That is why the 37-minute window matters, because it sets an expectation. Once that expectation is broken, even a small anomaly starts to look bigger, especially when it follows a rare interstellar encounter. Still, timing matters because the only major change in Maven's recent routine was the new target. 3I Atlas is not a local comet with a familiar pattern. It is an object from beyond our star system, and the script says its chemical intensity has already baffled astronomers. That detail does not prove danger, yet it hints that the environment around the object might carry particles or energy that behave in unfamiliar ways. The report even frames the leading theories around that possibility. Was it a software glitch triggered by the comet's unique radiation, or did the visitor contain particles that affected Maven's sensitive sensors? Those ideas stay inside the boundaries of physics, yet they still carry a chill, because they suggest the spacecraft may have been touched by something it was not designed to handle. What pushes the story into unease is how many eyes were on this moment. As 3I Atlas continued toward its closest approach to Earth on December 19th, telescopes and spacecraft from Hawaii to India were tracking its approach. In that global watch, Maven was one of the few observers with a clean view from Mars, and it fell silent right after doing the one task everyone wanted. This is where coincidence begins to feel like a pattern, not because it confirms alien technology, but because it forces a fair question. If the spacecraft was healthy, and if the blackout was routine, what exact factor turned a normal gap into a lasting silence? The following section will answer that question by examining the mechanisms that can cause signal loss from a deep space probe. When Maven stops talking, NASA engineers respond like engineers, because silence in space is a problem before it becomes a legend. They begin with software, since every probe depends on code that must run for years without a restart. One wrong command can lock a transmitter, freeze an instrument, or push the craft into a protective mode that refuses to clear. It sounds plain, yet it is realistic, because it does not require anything new in the sky, only one failure at the worst second. Radiation is the next suspect. Space around Mars is filled with invisible energy, and electronics can be sensitive to sudden bursts. The report raises a specific worry that 3I Atlas may have unique radiation and that Maven could have been exposed when it aimed its instruments for a close look. Engineers cannot confirm that from a silent spacecraft, but they can review the last transmission that arrived on schedule, searching for tiny signs that the system was under stress. Then they consider particles. The video asks whether the interstellar visitor contained particles that affected Maven's sensors. Particles do not need intent to cause damage, they only need the right conditions. A stream of high-energy material can create noise, confuse readings, or trigger automatic safety steps. This idea stays inside normal physics, yet it still feels unsettling, because 3I Atlas is not a familiar object from our solar system. Each explanation covers part of the mystery, and each leaves something unanswered. Maven's instruments were said to be functioning normally, and the systems were green. On December 4th, the orbiter slipped behind Mars, which should have caused a planned blackout. The report gives the length as 37 minutes, a routine gap while Mars blocked Earth's view. That is the easy part. The hard part is what happened after the craft emerged from Mars's shadow, because nothing came back. No signal and no data means there is no gradual fade to study. Across tens of millions of kilometers, the silence stretches on, and distance turns every test into a waiting game. NASA engineers are described as working around the clock, which suggests they are trying more than one path, from software resets to deeper diagnostics, yet the probe still does not answer. That vacuum invites speculation. The report says talk is reaching fever pitch within the scientific community, and that pressure leaks into public imagination. Some people focus on alien tech because an interstellar intruder already sounds like a movie. Others argue for caution because coincidence can look meaningful when you only have a few data points. Either way, the timing keeps pulling the conversation back to the same place. The probe looked at 3I Atlas, then it went quiet. The report never gives a cause, and that uncertainty becomes fuel. Maven had been orbiting Mars for more than a decade, so many expected it to survive the blackout and return with a handshake. Instead, the silence arrives like a clean cut, and the lack of even a weak reply makes the event feel deliberate, even when it still may not be. So NASA is left balancing two truths at once. Spacecraft can fail, and rare visitors can bring unfamiliar conditions. The engineers chase conventional causes first, yet the one new variable remains: the object itself. If software, radiation, or particles are responsible, the evidence should exist somewhere in that final sequence, and that brings the story to a single narrow window. What changed during those 37 minutes behind Mars that turned a normal blackout into lasting silence? Time becomes the real pressure point, because even while Maven stays silent, 3I Atlas does not slow down or wait for anyone to catch up. It is also a rare kind of event, because 3I Atlas is only the third confirmed interstellar object ever seen, so there is no long playbook to follow. When it raced past at over 149,000 miles per hour, it proved how quickly this chance can vanish. A delay of 1 day can mean a different view or none at all. The object keeps moving through the solar system at extreme speed, and the report frames it like a visitor closing distance with every passing hour. For scientists, that motion is not just a line on a chart, because each day it gets nearer, the chance to watch it changes. Light, angle, and background all shift, and the window for clear observations can open and close fast. That is why telescopes around the world begin tracking its path with more urgency. The video points to a wide arc of observers, from Hawaii to India, which signals something important. This is not one lab staring at one screen. It is a global watch spread across time zones, with teams handing off the sky like a relay, so the target never fully escapes. In that growing network, every update matters, because the next major moment is fixed. The report names it plainly, the closest approach to Earth on December 19th. A date like that turns curiosity into a countdown. People who never follow space news can still understand a deadline, because a deadline forces you to ask what will be different before and after it arrives. Maven was supposed to help answer that question, since Mars' orbit offers a cleaner angle and less glare than many Earth-based views. It could have added a rare piece of evidence, a close-range look from a different side of the solar system. Now that voice is gone, and the missing data feels like a page torn from a book right before the plot twist. NASA engineers keep working, yet the silence refuses to give them quick feedback. They cannot ask the spacecraft what it sees, and they cannot confirm whether the last images captured anything unusual beyond the interstellar object itself. All they can do is search logs, test theories, and try to reach a probe that once replied like clockwork. Outside the control room, the mystery spreads, because a quiet spacecraft makes the story feel personal. Viewers imagine a machine hanging above Mars, listening for a signal it cannot send, while an outsider keeps moving closer to Earth. The report does not claim proof of alien control, but it points to speculation rising, and that alone changes how people read the timeline. If 3I Atlas is already baffling astronomers with chemical intensity, then its approach raises a plain concern. Even without intent, could its environment carry radiation or particles that interfere with delicate systems? That question matters now because the next stage will involve more instruments looking longer and harder, and the risk, real or imagined, will travel with the target. So the calendar keeps tightening. December 19th sits ahead like a locked door, and the key is information we may never get from Maven. Whatever happened near Mars may not be over yet, because the object is still on the move, and the world is still watching. When the closest approach arrives, will we see only a bright blur on telescopes, or the first sign that something follows behind the silence? A spacecraft can travel for years and still vanish in a single quiet moment, and that is what makes the Maven silence feel so heavy. It watched 3I Atlas from Mars orbit, captured rare images, then slipped behind Mars on December 4th for a planned blackout that should have lasted 37 minutes. When it emerged, Earth received nothing across tens of millions of kilometers, and NASA was left with questions instead of data. There is no confirmed failure in the report, only a missing voice, and that gap invites two different readings. One says this was simple bad luck, a glitch, radiation, or particles hitting the wrong place at the wrong time. The other says the timing is the message, because the only new variable was an interstellar visitor already described as chemically intense and hard to explain. Now the calendar keeps moving. 3I Atlas is still heading toward its closest approach to Earth on December 19th, while telescopes from Hawaii to India track its path and wait for the next surprise. So what do you think silenced Maven, and what should we watch for as the visitor gets closer? Share your theory and subscribe for the next update.